XRP holders were abandoned, and we united. And 75,000 of you came together and said, we're going to unite, and we're going to stand as a community, and we're going to fight. And today, you won that fight.
In today's video, Attorney John Deaton discussed the latest with the SEC Ripple XRP lawsuit, the recent summary judgments from Ripple and the SEC, and what's next for the procedural process, likelihood of a settlement soon.
The judge also talks about, quote, each transaction must be analyzed. That means each sell. Okay, so just because Ripple sells to a hedge fund and that's an investment contract, doesn't mean that when that hedge fund sells it to Coinbase or on Coinbase to you or me, that is also an investment contract. It's not, okay? Or it certainly isn't per se. The judge goes on to say what we've all know, even if XRP exhibits certain characteristics of a commodity or a currency, it may nonetheless be offered or sold as an investment contract. Again, any asset can be marketed, packaged, offered, and sold as an investment contract. The judge cites what I said. I predicted this one. I said that when people said, well, just because the library judge didn't, I said, Judge Castell is in the Southern District of New York. He handled the Telegram case. He's friends with Judge Torres. And I said, he said in Telegram, as you all know, that the Gram purchase agreements and the Gram token itself is not a security. It's just alphanumeric sequence. It's software code. And Judge Torres cites the Telegram case where the security in this case is not simply the digital token. Gram, which is little more than alphanumeric cryptographic sequence. Okay, and so that's what she does, and she dismantles that. Let's see what else we want to talk about. So the judge with the institutional cells said that the hedge funds paid for the XRP, first prong met, investment of money. She said a common enterprise existed between the hedge funds, these institutional buyers, and Ripple, because Ripple had a written contract with them, and they're making certain promises or assertions or conditions, and that these hedge funds are clearly relying on those statements by Ripple, and that there is horizontal commonality, blah, blah, blah. Basically, she says, so that was met, and that those institutional buyers were relying on the efforts of Ripple. And therefore, Howie was satisfied. But she goes on to say, just because there was a common enterprise between the institutional buyers and Ripple doesn't mean that you and me are also in a common enterprise with Ripple. All right, or that the entire XRP ecosystem and all of that nonsense that the SEC's expert witness was saying and that the SEC was trying to say. Remember, XRP represented the investment contract. We're going to get to that in a minute. And XRP represented the common enterprise. So what else? She distinguishes that. And basically everything that we've been arguing. Remember, from the very beginning, when I filed a writ of mandamus, I said, if you limit it to direct sales by Ripple, then we don't have anything to say. If someone buys it from Ripple based on what Ripple told them, then maybe you can meet Howie. But when we buy it on Coinbase or Uphold or wherever else, many of us who never heard of Ripple when we first bought it, don't argue that we're in a common enterprise relying on the efforts of a company that we don't even know anything about. Okay, and so that's basically what the judge held in this case. The direct sales by Ripple to these institutions satisfied Howie. She goes on through there. Now, one thing I want to highlight, and I sent a email out earlier which was in footnote 16, the judge, because I did a podcast or a show where it was on Twitter, and someone said, John, do you think that the Judge Torres is paying attention to what's going on in the library? And I said, absolutely. And we know that for sure now, because footnote 16, the judge cites that January 30th transcript when I was in the hearing on behalf of Naomi Brockwell and was not arguing with the judge, but pleading with the judge. Can you clarify your ruling? And the judge promised that he was going to do it. Now, he didn't follow through on that promise. We know that. But when Judge Torres wrote this decision, that order wasn't out. So she relied on that transcript, and she cites the very page and lines of the transcript where the judge said to me, I'm going to make sure that to clarify my order does not apply to secondary market sales, because the judge says in this footnote, she cites that hearing and says the judge declined to extend his holding to include secondary sales. And so I just point that out is because I said we have to fight whenever there's a court hearing or there's an issue where we can be heard, where we can create a record. We got to do it. And I think that proves that all of this is related. Now, I want to go to page 24, because this is where I can tell you for sure that XRP holders made a difference. And, I got to tell you, I haven't watched it yet, but I heard that Moon Lambo did a video today, and that in the first couple minutes that he got quite emotional. And I can understand that. And I want you to feel validated, because a lot of people said, why are you doing this? Why would you go out on a limb? You're never going to make a difference. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. You can't fight the government. You can't win. You can't do anything. It's useless. And, we were arguing that you either don't fight or you fight, and you fight. So on page 24, the judge says that when she's talking about these programmatic sales, she says that, in fact, many programmatic buyers, now these are buyers on Coinbase or Uphold, these buyers were entirely unaware of Ripple's existence. And then she cites where she's relying on that information, and she cites ECF numbers 831-1-831-26. And that are the XRP holder affidavits. That's the 3,500 affidavits that we submitted to the court saying, hey, some of them said, yeah, we knew about Ripple when we bought XRP, but I didn't rely on them. But there were also thousands that said, listen, the first time I acquired XRP, I may have knew the word Ripple because it was used interchangeably, but I didn't know that there was this company called Ripple that sold software to banks. I had no idea when I bought XRP. So just think of it from a common sense perspective. How can you rely on the efforts of a company that you don't know exists? And that's basically what the judge is articulating here. And that's something that we fought hard to include in our brief. And so that's great. Let's see what else we go over real quick. Also, she talks about what we wrote in the brief as well, in our amicus brief, where she says these statements, there's no evidence that these statements from 2013, 2014 reached the general public. So SEC, you can't make a connection to these people who are buying it in a secondary market on Coinbase or Uphold or with Kraken or wherever. You can't make a connection that just because they made these statements on a YouTube channel or a Twitter handle, or they were at a conference and said something in 2015 that, James Rule XRP read it and said, oh, let me buy some XRP, or anyone else out there in the world of XRP. So she made a big deal about that. And so let's see. Anything else I want to highlight? I do want to note that Bill Hinman testified, because this shocked me, in his deposition, that he believed that you did not need to meet all factors of Howie. He actually said that in his deposition, and I really scratched my head at that. And Judge Torres says in footnote 18, because the court determines that the record does not establish the first Howie prong as to the other distributions, that's the employees getting paid, the court does not reach whether the second or third Howie prongs have been satisfied, which means all three prongs, and remember the third prong has two elements, must be met, or there's no investment contract. Okay. Now, then she goes on and says the same analysis applies to Chris Larson and Brad Garlinghouse. They sold on exchanges. It's a blind sell. People don't know who they are. So the same rationale applied to Ripple selling exchanges applies to them. They're not securities. Hard stop. Then she gets to basically, so she finds summary judgment in favor of the SEC on the institutional sales, the ones with the contracts. And then she finds summary judgment on behalf of Ripple for the programmatic sales on the exchanges, for the individuals, executives selling it, and for the other distributions. Okay, Ripple wins there. And then she basically says that leaves me with the recklessness, aiding and abetting of the two executives. And what she did was very consistent with her ruling. And she struck the fair notice defense. But a lot of people are arguing and saying it incorrectly. She didn't reject the fair notice defense in its entirety. She said the fair notice defense was inapplicable to institutional sales. All right. As a matter of fact, there is a footnote where she makes it distinguish. And right here, it's footnote. It's on page 29, footnote 20. She says, because the court finds that only the institutional sales constituted the offer and sale of investment contracts, the court does not address defendants' asserted fair notice defense as to the other transactions. She says the court's holding is limited to the institutional sales because the SEC's theory as to the other sales in this case are potentially inconsistent with enforcement in prior digital assets. So what she said is that the fair notice defense is inapplicable to the institutional sales with contracts because the law is clear with them, and that the SEC's prior enforcement actions are consistent with that. So she's striking the fair notice defense on that issue. She says, though, that if she would have ruled the others, sales were an unregistered security, then the fair notice defense could come into play. All right. So I just want to make that distinction because I haven't seen anyone make that distinction. They just said, oh, she struck the fair notice defense. Okay. But on those institutional sales, then the judge simply said, look, since there is no fair notice defense on institutional sales, then there is a jury out there. I'm not going to grant summary judgment to the SEC because she said there's a reasonable jury out there that could find that Chris Larson, Brad Garlinghouse were not reckless. That when you look at the legal memo that they saw, when you think about the FinCEN settlement that they were under, when you look at those things, those are fair game to defend against aiding and abetting. In other words, a jury could find that they're not reckless because that's a higher standard. And so that goes to a jury. And that's the part that goes to the jury. And basically, that was the decision in a nutshell. There's been a lot of confusion too about, and I want to try to find it, about secondary sales. Because she says that she's saying secondary market sales are not before her, which means that if she were going to apply a Howie test, she has to apply it to each transaction. And so maybe a secondary sale hypothetically could be a security, depending on what was communicated and all those things. And maybe it's not. And so she's not going to reach that. But she said that selling on exchanges, and she actually said that the programmatic sales are basically sitting in the foot, or however the saying goes, I don't have it in front of me, but she's basically saying that you stand in the secondary market where you don't know who the seller is. And if you don't know who the seller is, how do you rely on them? And so she de facto commented on the secondary market sales by saying XRP is not a security, right? The token itself is not a security. And these secondary transactions on exchanges, even when Ripple sells it, are not securities. Even when Brad Garlinghouse and Chris Larson sell it, it's not a security. So if Ripple and its executives are selling on an exchange, and those are not investment contracts, you can see how she really is kind of commenting on the secondary market sale. So I understand her ruling completely on why she said that comment. I'm not going to comment because it's not before me. But when you read that decision, it's clear secondary market transactions. Now, the point being is that the SEC is going to have to prove that Coinbase, that maybe the person was relying on Coinbase or any of these things. And so this decision is great news. To their credit, I remember the chief legal officer at Coinbase saying, hey, we're going to not hesitate to relist it if the language is clear. Now, if we got the judge from Connecticut, we may not have had that clarity. But because we got a judge who applies the law and the issues before her and isn't afraid of certain things, I don't want to be too critical. I'm just saying is that we got a good judge. And I've always said that, and she proved it today. And it's a fantastic decision. They're so great to see XRP holders so excited, to see them happy, to see a good day in crypto. And I want to say that thank you to those out there who kept the faith. It takes a lot to hold on to XRP for this amount of time, with this much FUD out there. When this case was first filed, we stood alone. That's a fact. We stood alone. Okay. I got ridiculed publicly. Who's this crazy guy filing writs of mandamus 9 days after the lawsuit against Ripple? Laughed at. XRP holders were abandoned, and we united. And 75,000 of you came together and said, we're going to unite, and we're going to stand as a community, and we're going to fight. And today, you won that fight, and you deserve all the credit for it. I can't thank you enough. So many people, and I don't want to turn into Moon Lambo tonight and start crying. Sorry, Matt. I just don't want to do it. But I can't tell you how much your appreciation for me means to me. It means the world to me. So thank you. But you deserve the credit just as much as I do. I look forward to my steak dinner, Charlie Gasparino. And tomorrow, I'll be on Charles Payne, I believe, to talk about this case and to talk about this great victory for XRP holders first and foremost, but for crypto in general, because this case has ramifications. Listen, if you saw what Gensler and the SEC said today, they're praising it like they won. This is a huge blow. There were emergency meetings at the SEC. Guarantee you today. Great news for Coinbase. Imagine these exchanges are relisting it within hours. What's the message there? And finally, I think this is a huge blow to Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler and their anti-crypto campaign. We desperately needed this. We needed a judge to just look at it objectively, not favor one side, call balls and strikes the way they are. And that's what we got. And I said, we're going to win in the end. And today was a great day.